Gotta say, I'm pretty hyped about this one. Expo DOM. It seems like it could really shake things up when it comes to building native apps. We've been digging into a bunch of articles and videos on it, and the whole idea is kind of wild, you know? Like, you can take pieces of your existing React websites and run them straight in a native app.
Really? That sounds almost too good to be true. Is it just like embedding a website in an app with a web view? I mean, we've seen that before, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought too at first, but it's actually way more advanced. It's not about showing a static web page. It's about taking individual components.
Yeah.
You know, the ones built with like div and span tags, maybe even styled with something like Tailwind, and having them render and actually behave like native UI elements.
Oh, okay. Now that's interesting. I can see how that would be useful. So let's say I have a complex web component, something like an interactive map or a data visualization. I could just drop that right into my mobile app.
Exactly. And devs are already building some pretty impressive stuff with it, from what I'm seeing. One article talked about using it to render like really complex markdown content with perfectly formatted tables and syntax highlighting. Apparently, it's way easier than trying to make all that work natively.
Yeah, that makes sense. Web rendering engines have been fine-tuned for years to handle things like text layout and styling. If we can tap into that power within our native apps, it's a huge win.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just for static content either. I've seen videos of people using Expo DOM to run interactive flowcharts, you know, the ones built with React Flow, and even 3D scenes rendered with 3JS, all within a native app.
Wow, so we're really blending the lines here between web and native. This feels almost like a whole new way of thinking about building apps.
It does, right?
Yeah.
And here's where it gets even crazier. You can actually interact with these DOM components from your native code. So picture this. You click a button that looks like it's on a web page, but it triggers a native push notification.
Hold on, what? How's that even possible?
It's all thanks to native actions. Basically, you pass functions from your native code into your DOM components, and then those functions can be triggered by events happening in the DOM.
Okay, so it's like creating this bridge between the web view and the native part of the app. That opens up some pretty interesting possibilities. We could blend web and native functionality in ways we couldn't before.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to simple things like notifications. You can pass data back and forth between your web components and native code.
Mm.
You can even do things like measure the size of DOM elements to adjust your app's layout dynamically.
I'm starting to see why you were so excited about this. It really does seem like a game changer, breaking down those traditional walls between web and native development.
Yeah, it does, right? But before we get too carried away, it's important to remember that Expo DOM isn't meant to replace native mobile development completely. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Well, the real strength of Expo DOM is its incremental adoption approach. You can start by bringing in big chunks of your existing website,
Mm.
especially for features that don't need, like, super tight native integration or top-notch performance.
So we're talking about using our web development skills and code base to get a mobile app up and running quickly.
Exactly. And then, as you need more native-like performance or to use specific device features, you can gradually replace those DOM components with fully native views.
That's a smart strategy. It takes the pressure off having to build everything from scratch in a new environment.
Right. Working smarter, not harder, using the best tool for the job at each stage. And the cool thing is that Expo handles a lot of the complexity for you behind the scenes, like bundling and configuration, so you can focus on actually building your app.
That's always nice. So we've got this powerful new tool for mixing web and native, but where do we even begin? Can we start using this today?
It's still experimental, yeah, but Expo DOM is officially launching with Expo SDK 52. But if you're feeling adventurous, you can already test it out using the canary builds of Expo. And here's the best part. If you want to bring a web component into your native app, all you got to do is add the use DOM directive at the top of the components file.
Wow, that's surprisingly easy. It sounds almost like magic, but I'm sure there's a lot happening under the hood to make this work.
Oh, definitely. And there are some limitations to keep in mind. For instance, DOM components are self-contained, meaning they don't share the same JavaScript environment as the rest of your native app, which can make communication a bit tricky.
Right. I see. It's like having two separate worlds trying to talk to each other.
Exactly. But even with these limitations, Expo DOM opens up a ton of exciting new possibilities for developers who want to use their web skills to build truly native experiences. And this is just the beginning.
Oh, what else is there? Is there something even bigger on the horizon?
There is. The really mind-blowing part is how all this connects to the rise of React Server Components, or RSCs for short. We'll dive into that more after a quick break.
So before the break, we were talking about how Expo DOM really blends web and native development. But let's zoom out a bit and connect this to a bigger trend happening in software.
Right. Remember those native actions we talked about? The ones that let you trigger native stuff from a DOM component?
Mhm.
Well, those actions are actually built on a similar idea to something called React Server Components, or RSCs.
Oh, okay. So native actions are kind of like a mini version of React Server components, at least in how they communicate across different environments.
Exactly. And that connection is super important. It hints at a future where we can build apps that blend the best of web and native, all powered by a unified architecture. To get the full potential of Expo DOM, it's good to understand what makes React Server Components so groundbreaking.
I'm listening. I've heard the buzz, but I'm still not quite clear on what RSCs actually do and why they're causing such a stir.
Well, picture a complex web application with loads of data and interactivity. Typically, all that code has to run in the user's browser, which can lead to slow loading and a poor user experience, especially on mobile.
Right, the classic trade-off with web apps, you get the reach and flexibility of the web, but often at the cost of performance and that snappy native feel.
Yeah, but with React Server Components, you can run parts of your React code on a powerful server instead of in the user's browser. This means the server handles all the heavy lifting of data processing and component rendering, and then sends the finished product to the user's device.
Ah, I get it. So it's like a super brain working behind the scenes to make the app feel super fast for the user.
Precisely. And there are some real advantages to this. Firstly, servers are usually way more powerful than the average phone or laptop, so they can process data and generate those complex UI components much faster.
Makes sense. So the user's device doesn't have to do all the work, freeing up resources and boosting performance. What else? Are there any other advantages?
Definitely. With RSCs, you only send the essential code and data over the network. It's like sending a postcard instead of a whole encyclopedia. This means smaller bundle sizes, faster load times, and a smoother experience overall.
So you're combining the speed and power of server-side processing with the interactivity and responsiveness of a client-side app. Sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It is. And here's where things get really interesting with Expo DOM. Remember how it lets you run web code in a native app using DOM components?
Oh yeah, that was the mind-blowing part, using things like divs and spans to build native app interfaces.
Well, imagine combining that with React Server Components. Parts of your app could be running on a powerful server, seamlessly talking to your Expo DOM components within the native app, and then triggering those native actions to interact with the device.
Whoa, that's a lot to process. So we're talking a web view inside a native app, talking to a server, all while triggering things like push notifications and accessing device hardware. It's like this crazy web of technologies all working together for a universal app experience.
Exactly. And that's the exciting vision. Not just porting web apps to mobile, but building truly universal experiences that blend the best of web, native, and server-side technologies.
It's like we're going beyond the limits of a single platform and moving toward a more holistic approach to development. It could fundamentally change how we build software.
I think so too. To be totally transparent, this smooth integration between Expo DOM and RSCs isn't quite there yet. There are some technical challenges to overcome. For instance, RSCs and Expo DOM currently operate in somewhat isolated environments, with limits on how they share data and context. It's like they speak different languages.
Ah, that communication issue again. It's like having two amazing musicians who can't quite sync up their instruments yet.
Perfect analogy. But the good news is that both Expo and the React team are working on better interoperability. They're exploring shared context and improved component hydration techniques.
Now, you mentioned hydration earlier, a term I'm not entirely familiar with. Can you break it down?
Of course. Hydration, in simple terms, is taking a server-rendered component and making it interactive on the client side. Like the server bakes a delicious cake, the UI structure, and then hydration is adding the frosting and decorations, interactivity, and event handlers to make it complete.
Okay, so hydration is about bringing server-rendered components to life, either in the browser or, in this case, the Expo DOM environment.
Exactly. And as hydration improves, we'll see smoother transitions between server-rendered content and client-side interactivity, even in Expo DOM.
This is all super fascinating. We're seeing a real change in how we think about building apps, but with all this talk about seamless integration and blurring the lines, could this approach actually make development more complex in some ways?
Great question, and something to think about. Anytime you bring in new technologies, there's a learning curve. But I think the potential benefits here outweigh the difficulties.
I'm inclined to agree. The ability to use the best of web, native, and server-side in a single app is a real game changer.
It is. And as these tools evolve and workflows become more streamlined, I think we'll see a wave of innovative apps that weren't possible before.
I can't wait to see what developers come up with. It feels like we're on the cusp of a new era in app development.
Me too. But before we get too lost in the future, I want to bring things back to earth and offer a practical tip for anyone excited to start experimenting with Expo DOM. So we've talked a lot about the potential of Expo DOM, especially when paired with React Server components. But for anyone out there itching to get started, my advice is start small.
Solid advice when you're exploring something new. But what exactly do you mean by start small with Expo DOM?
Well, don't feel like you need to rewrite your entire app or start from scratch. Instead, just pick a specific feature or component that could really benefit from Expo DOM. Maybe something you've already got on your website that doesn't need heavy native integration.
So, like if I have a product details page on my e-commerce site, I could try integrating that into my mobile app using Expo DOM.
Exactly. It's a low-risk way to get a feel for the technology, understand the workflow, see how it actually performs in a real app. Plus, you might be surprised by what you can do with even a small integration.
That's a great point. It takes the pressure off and lets developers gradually bring Expo DOM into their projects. It's not all or nothing.
Right. And as you get more comfortable, you can start tackling more complex integrations, maybe even start playing around with how Expo DOM and React Server components work together.
This whole deep dive has been really insightful. We've covered so much, from the basics of Expo DOM to its potential with RSCs. But as we wrap up, I'm curious, what does this all mean for the future of app development? Where do you see this going?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I think the most exciting part is that we're moving away from this rigid separation between web and native. Expo DOM, along with trends like React Native and Flutter, are blurring those lines and creating a more unified world for building apps.
I agree. It's not about picking one platform over another anymore. It's about choosing the best tools for the job and building experiences that work seamlessly across platforms.
Exactly. And a few things are driving this shift. First, the web platform itself is evolving so quickly. We're seeing new APIs and features that let web apps do things that used to require native code, like accessing device hardware, sending push notifications, working offline.
So the web is becoming more and more powerful, which makes it even better for creating rich app-like experiences.
It is. And frameworks like React Native are making it easier to use web-like tools to build native apps. It's like a two-way street. The web is getting more native, and native development is getting more web-like.
And Expo DOM sits right in the middle of all this, bridging the gap between the two worlds. It gives developers the freedom to choose the best approach for each part of their app.
Absolutely. And I think this convergence of web and native is good for everyone. Developers have more options and power, and users get better, more seamless experiences on all their devices.
I totally agree, and I think this is just the start. As these technologies keep evolving, we're going to see even more innovative and amazing applications. The future of app development is bright.
It is. So to all the developers out there listening, now is the time to explore and experiment. Dive into Expo DOM, play with React Server components, and embrace this new era of app development where web and native are becoming one. Until next time, happy coding.